Hey everyone, my name is Andrea. I'm part of the airfocus team and I'm super excited to be here today. Many thanks to Product School for hosting the session. Let's get started. Today we are going to talk about prioritization frameworks and the secret to good product prioritization. Just a little about me before we get started. I'm a senior product marketing manager at airfocus. I've got over 10 years experience in product management and support. I'm a speaker and writer, and I love helping organizations to become more outcome focused. Now, in my time in product, I always have people ask me if I know what is the best product framework to help them decide what to work on next. And here's my controversial answer, or maybe not so controversial. None of them. If you are looking to understand which framework will help you decide what to work on next, the answer is none of them will actually help you do what you are looking to do. Let's start with understanding where frameworks actually came from first. It all started with the transformation between waterfall to agile. When the world changed from one to another, the need to want to predict things quickly followed thereafter. So the thought process here is, the more you can predict how things will pan out, the faster you can get things out the door, right? But there's a bit of a flaw with this thought process. And it comes down to the fact that there is a misunderstanding between the terms agile and agility. Let's take a look at what that is. Agile is a methodology that focuses on small iterations in order to deliver customer value. That's the key words that you need to remember. Deliver customer value. So instead of waiting for something to reach its quote unquote done state, you release things little by little and start gathering feedback as you see how people respond to those changes, creating a feedback loop directly from the customer to your product and back again. Agility, on the other hand, is how quickly you get those iterations out the door. Agility is about understanding the velocity and the capacity at which your team is able to deliver things. So at some point, as we started creating software, this thought process from small iterations actually flipped to add focus on the speed behind the process. Because let's be honest, we all want to get things out the door quickly. So if you have a framework to understand the capacity, why can't you also have a framework to decide what things you should be working on as well? And so the rise of the framework acronyms came about. I'm sure you're familiar with some of the things that you see on the screen right now. So there's RICE, there's ICE, there's WSJF, there's SUP. Everyone from Intercom to Basecamp have raved about how their frameworks help them decide what to work on next. But there's also a fallacy with that thought process. And that is that frameworks are output focused and assume you have already run discovery. There is no way that you can know the reach, the impact, or effort accurately for most things if you haven't actually vetted if what you are working on are the right things to work on in the first place. And if you haven't spoken to anyone about it, it's all just a guessing game. How do you actually have confidence for something you have no information on? The reality is you cannot. So here's how we start focusing on how to actually make things better. Our first key takeaway here is that prioritization is not a linear process. You don't just whip out a framework, tick some boxes, and then stuff just gets done. Prioritization actually occurs on 3 different levels: on the roadmap, on your product backlog, and on your development backlog. As new information is discovered on each one of these steps, that information is then adapted to be included in your final research. When prioritizing, always start with your objectives. This will allow you to understand how the work you do will help you reach your goals. If you have initiatives that don't meet your team's current objectives, you already know what not to work on. So you've done your first level of prioritization right there. Once you have identified which initiatives do fit your current objectives, it's time to figure out which ones will give you the desired outcome with the greatest impact. This is where you can use Teresa Torres's opportunity solution tree. The opportunity solution tree allows you to frame and visualize your thinking. It is not about what is the best or the worst thing to work on. It's about understanding all of your options and objectively asking the question, will this help me reach my desired outcome? Once you have run experimentation and discovery on these items, you will then have a better idea of the following. What are you working on and why? Are those things worth pursuing? Will they give you the desired outcome that you're looking for? And how will you measure success? Now that you have a better understanding of whether or not something will give you that desired outcome, can you now actually say with confidence, yes, this is the right thing to work on. This is what we foresee the impact being. This is the expected customer reach, and so on. This is the place where you start looking at your quick wins and your possible time sinkers, and in coordination with your team, you start to understand minimum viable features that, again, will have the greatest impact based on the desired outcome you're trying to reach. After the product team finishes their discovery process and official implementation begins, you will then start sending things off to your development team. They will be prioritizing based on their own capacity and knowledge, and because this is about the output, that is, the how of the process, they may choose their own specific frameworks as well. That could be Scrum, it could be Kanban, or any other framework of their choosing. The process here is entirely different than with the product team. They have to take into account things like new improvements, bugs, and maintenance, ensuring that they have a good balance between all of these items. So then the question becomes, what are frameworks good for anyway? Frameworks provide significant value in comparing options to one another, which is one of the big reasons why so many product people gravitate towards them. What you're seeing on the screen right now is airfocus's priority chart, which is based on custom values that you set for your ratings. This is incredibly helpful to see because I have an idea of all the items in my backlog and I can identify my quick wins, my strategic items, and items that I could cut off if they don't currently fit my capacity. With that in mind, though, we have to understand that the final decision is not based on the algorithm, but based on the product manager's knowledge. How I achieve this with my team is I have in the app my personal framework. So I've got reach, impact, team effort, and revenue, which affect value and effort. These then give my items a score, which are then mapped out in the final priority chart. But there's some context missing from here. What we are not seeing are objectives, market trends, feedback, context that sit outside of the final score that is provided for me. So at the end of the day, while I get a score and I get a really handy chart that allow me to compare things to one another, there's still going to be information that sits outside of the algorithm. So it's important to understand and highlight that product prioritization frameworks are there to help you frame the information that is in front of you. They help enable conversations between team members and assist you with understanding relevant data. What they aren't there for is to make the final decision for you. If that was the case, why would we need product managers anyway? If inputting numbers is all it took, then computers could do the jobs for us. If anything, the more inputs you rely on to make decisions, the more of a bottleneck you create for yourself. Instead, think about giving yourself room to experiment, measure, and learn from the process. Above all, frameworks are just inputs. They lack empathy. They lack understanding of the problem. They lack the what, the why, and the for whom you are building things for. They often tend to miss a lot of context that sits outside of those specific inputs You have to gather the final score. If you want to be customer-centric, you actually need to consider feedback people are giving you, which again, sit outside the number that you have to input for the framework. Now, I'm sure at this point you're wondering that I'm either crazy or what am I talking about? So to kind of give my presentation a little bit of support, I actually interviewed some product managers and some product leaders that do use frameworks. So first, I want to introduce you to Luis. Luis is a director of product, and his framework of choice is WSJF. And this is what he had to say about it. I ask my team to use WSJF on a weekly basis, not because the end score or the inputs matter, only because it gets them to think about a wider context of things. Tunnel vision can often be a problem, and the framework reminds them of any information they may have missed, and thus helps them frame information better. Here's another product leader. Meet Jen. Jen is a product consultant, and her framework of choice is the Kano model. Here's what Jen had to say. I love the Kano model for sorting out the relationship between experience impact and expectations. I've used it on and off for years, and now find myself turning back to it for a team that struggles to convince the business partners that tech debt and keeping the boring but foundational stuff working needs to be considered in the same context as new delighter features. Meet Steve. Steve is CPO, and his framework of choice is ICE. Here's what Steve had to say. I use ICE, but it needs to be augmented for all the other business variables that is not meant to include. Skill set, engineering, capacity at any given time, cost of opportunity, strategic and reputational impact of doing something early, so on and so forth. All depends on the maturity of the business and ecosystem. This actually leads to a very good point that I want to make on next, which is you don't actually have to tie yourself to one framework. So if you do have a framework of choice, you have to consider that it may actually change based on your product maturity, product growth, the industry that you work on, and of course, the context around it. Don't be afraid to mix and match either. If anything, it's very, very likely that you will. If you're a younger company, you might use something like hierarchy of purpose to begin with, then switch to a more mature model as you scale up. If you're trying to understand expected features versus tech debt versus delighters, you might use the Kano model. You might use Teresa Torres's opportunity solution tree to run your discovery. And then you may switch to ICE, RICE, or WSJF once you want to frame conversations around the information you have discovered. You may also use cost of delay in negotiation meetings. All of this to say, prioritization really is an art form. It is not meant to be restrictive. It is not meant to force you to follow a set of rules. It is meant to allow you to experiment, be creative, and then convey that information to others. So whether you're managing a product, a service, or a team, there's a few things to always keep in mind. First, prioritization is not a linear process, and it happens at multiple stages of the development process. If you are going to start somewhere, start with your objectives to keep your team focused. Find problems to solve before features to build, and run discovery to better understand how different opportunities may give you a desired outcome. And remember that frameworks help you understand and visualize information, foster conversation and discussions, but they are absolutely not there to force you to make a decision. And in the words of Marty Kagan, if leaders are not willing or able to make the right choices to focus on objectives and outcomes before prioritizing at random, then the product strategy is doomed from the start. Prioritization alone is not focus, but having the right focus through your vision and your objectives will actually allow you to prioritize better. Focus what you do. Do it intentionally and do it with purpose and do it with direction so that you can build great products. If you have any questions, you can reach me through Twitter. And if you want to learn more about different prioritization techniques so that you can have those better conversations with your team, scan the QR code and get our Mastering Prioritization Guide. Thanks very much.